She buried her husband in foreign soil. Then she buried her first son. Then the second. 3 graves in a country that was never supposed to be home. And now, Naomi is standing on a road with nothing. No man, no money, no future. And she turns to the 2 young women walking beside her and says the most selfless thing a broken person can say. Go, leave me. You still have a chance. I do not. One of them listens. The other looks at her, this hollow, grief-stricken woman, and says something that makes no logical sense. I am not leaving you. Not because she has to. Not because anyone is watching. But because something in her has decided that this woman's life still matters, even when the woman herself no longer believes it. What happens next will take your breath away. Understand what Naomi carried into that road. She had not lost one thing. She had lost everything, slowly, in sequence, so that each new grief arrived just when she thought she had steadied herself from the last. It started with the decision to leave. Bethlehem was starving. Elimelech made the call. We go to Moab. We survive. We come back when the famine is over. It was a practical decision, a responsible one, a husband protecting his family the only way he knew how. But Naomi felt it, that low, unnamed anxiety of leaving the place where your identity lives. She was not just leaving a location, she was leaving the land that held her God, her community, her name. In the ancient world, you did not simply relocate, you uprooted, and uprooting at a cost that doesn't show up immediately. They settled in Moab, foreign soil, foreign gods, foreign customs, because Moab had food and Judah had none. Then Elimelech died. There are no words in that text about how Naomi felt. The Bible simply says he died and moves on. But silence in the scripture is not absence, it is restraint. Because what do you say about the moments the person who was supposed to outlive the hard season simply does not? The boys grew. They married Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth, and for a moment, Naomi exhaled. She had 2 sons. 2 sons meant she was not alone. 2 sons meant she still had a structure to exist inside. She held herself together around them. Then, Mahlon and Chilion died, both of them. And now, Naomi is left alone in a foreign country, an old woman with 2 daughters-in-law who are not her blood, on soil that is not her home, with a God she is no longer sure is paying attention. She decides to go back to Bethlehem with no hope. Let's be precise about this. She's not going back because she believes something good is waiting. She's going back because there is nothing left in Moab, and she would rather die in the right place. She's going home to finish. She tells Orpah and Ruth to return to their mothers. Go back, start over, find new husbands. You are young. Your story is not over the way mine is over. She's not being dismissive. She's just being honest. She's saying, I see you, I love you, and I have nothing to give you. Do not waste your youth in my emptiness. Orpah wept, kissed her mother-in-law, and left. Orpah was not cruel. She was practical. Orpah made a reasonable decision. She had a life ahead of her, and she went to live it. That is not cowardice. That is survival. But Ruth did not move. Naomi tried again. She turned to Ruth and said, Look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Go after her. And something in Ruth stiffened. You have to feel what Ruth was being asked to give up. She was young. She was a widow, yes. But she was young and in her own country where she was known, where her family was, where she understood the customs and spoke the language and could, with time and grace, rebuild. In Moab, she had a future. It was not guaranteed, but it was possible. In Bethlehem, she had nothing. She was Moabite. which meant in Israel she was the wrong nationality, the wrong religion, the wrong history. Moabites and Israelites did not mix easily. She would be a foreigner in every room she entered. She would be the widow who followed a bitter old woman across a border for reasons nobody would quite understand. And she knew all of this. She was not naive. She was not swept up in emotion without counting the cost. She looked at Naomi, exhausted, grieving, self-described as empty, and she made a fully conscious, fully costly decision. She said, "Do not ask me to leave you." And then she said the words, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried." Sit with that for a moment. Ruth is not just saying, "I will stay with you." She's saying, "I am dismantling my identity and rebuilding it around yours. I am releasing my homeland, my family, my religion, my future prospects, everything a woman in the ancient world needed to survive, and I am choosing you instead." But Naomi is not a safe bet. Naomi is not a wise investment by every measurable standard. Following Naomi is the worst decision Ruth could make. And Ruth knew that, and she stayed anyway. When Naomi saw that Ruth had made up her mind, the Bible says she stopped speaking. What do you say to someone who chooses you when you have given them every reason not to? When you are at your most broken and most empty, and someone looks at all of that and says, "Yes, still you, still this, still us." You go quiet because some things are too large for words. The walk from Moab to Bethlehem was not short. 2 women on foot, no men, no protection, no certainty about what waited at the other end. What did they talk about? What silences passed between them? Did Ruth reach for Naomi's hand on the hard parts of the road? Did Naomi ever stop and wonder if she was leading this young woman into ruin? We are not told, but the road was real and they walked it. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred up. The women recognized Naomi and came out to her. "Is this Naomi?" And Naomi, this is one of the most emotionally honest moments in all of the scripture. She said, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara." Naomi means pleasant. Mara means bitter. She was not performing grief. She was not looking for sympathy. She was correcting the record. She was saying, the person you knew by that name does not exist anymore. The pleasant woman who lives here with a husband and sons and a future is gone. I am what remains. I am the bitter residue of a life that went wrong. She even goes further. She says, "I went out full, and the Lord has brought me back empty." This is a woman accusing God, quietly but clearly. She is not shaking her fist at the sky. She is stating what she believes to be the verdict. The Almighty took everything. She is the evidence. Ruth is standing right beside her during all of this, having just given up her entire life to be here, hearing herself in effect described as nothing because Naomi calls herself empty, even with Ruth beside her. Did that land? Did it cut? Maybe Ruth understood. Maybe she knew that what Naomi was losing was irreplaceable in a way that even Ruth's love could not feel. A husband, sons, the specific shape of a life. You cannot grieve on behalf of someone else's losses and call it even. So Ruth absorbed it, said nothing, and stayed. It was the beginning of the barley harvest. Ruth made a proposal. "Let me go to the fields and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I find favor. Let me go work. Let me do what I can do." She was not waiting for rescue. She was not collapsing into the situation. She was getting up and finding a way to provide. Gleaning was the lowest form of agricultural labor. You followed behind the harvesters and collected what fell off or what was left at the edges. It was legal, Mosaic law guaranteed it for the poor and the foreigner, but it was also exhausting, exposed work. You were in the fields all day in the sun, bent over, dependent on the mercy of whoever owned the land. Ruth walked into a field. The field belonged to Boaz. He is wealthy and influential. He walks into his field and greets his workers. They greeted him back. This detail is not filler. In a culture structured on hierarchy, a man who greets his workers with blessings is telling you something about his character before his actions do. Boaz notices Ruth. He asks his foreman who she is, and the foreman tells him, she is the Moabite woman who came back with Naomi. She asks permission politely. She has been working since morning and she has barely stopped to rest. Boaz is already doing the calculation. He knows Naomi. He knows what happened in Moab. And now he is looking at a young foreign woman who walked away from her homeland to take care of his kinswoman, and who showed up to the hardest work available without complaint or demand. Something moved in him. He went to her, and what he said to her, if you understand the world she was living in, was extraordinary. He told her not to go to any other field. Stay here. Stay close to my young women. I have instructed the men not to touch you. When you are thirsty, drink from the water we have drawn. He was offering her safety in a world where a foreign woman alone in a field was genuinely vulnerable. He was placing himself between her and that danger. He was saying, you are protected here. Ruth fell to the ground, not as performance, as genuine disbelief. She said, why have I found favor in your eyes? I am a foreigner. Why me? Why would you do this? I have no claim on your kindness. I am exactly the kind of person your world has every reason to overlook. And Boaz said, I know what you did for Naomi. All of it. I know you left your father and your mother and your native land and came to a people you had never known. And I am asking God to give you a full reward for it. He saw her, not just her need, her choice, her loyalty, her sacrifice. What did that feel like? To be fully seen after months of grief and foreignness and invisible labor. She wept at his feet. The text is so spare we almost miss it, but she wept. And at mealtime, he called her over to eat with his workers. He passed her roasted grains. He made sure she had more than enough. And after she left, he told his men privately, leave extra grain in the field on purpose. Let her find it. This is not a man following the law. This is a man who has been moved. When Ruth came home that evening with an ephah of barley, far more than a gleaner should ever produce, Naomi looked at it and something cracked open inside her. She asked where Ruth had been. Ruth told her, Boaz, and Naomi, the woman who called herself empty, the woman who said God had dealt bitterly with her, said, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. It is the first time since we met her that she has spoken well of God. Something is stirring. Weeks passed. The harvest continued. Ruth kept returning to Boaz's field, and Naomi watched. She saw how Boaz treated Ruth. She understood what it meant. She had lived long enough and lost enough to recognize something real when it was forming. She also understood the law. Boaz was a Kinsman-redeemer, a relative of Elimelech, with the legal rights to restore what their family had lost. Property, name, future. He could do it, but nothing would happen if no one moved. So Naomi, the woman who had been passive in her grief, who had been surviving rather than living, made a plan. And the plan required Ruth to be brave. She told her, tonight, Boaz will be at the threshing floor. When he lies down, go to him, uncover his feet, lie down, and he will tell you what to do. Feel what Naomi was asking. She was asking Ruth to walk alone in the dark to a man's sleeping place and make herself known. This was not without risk. This required Ruth to trust Naomi's read of Boaz's character, to believe that this man who has shown her kindness in the daylight would honor that same spirit in the dark. It required courage, and Ruth said, "I will do everything you say." Then she went. She waited in the dark, watching until the work was done and the eating was done, and Boaz lay down at the edge of the grain pile. Then she moved quietly. She uncovered his feet. She lay down. Midnight. Boaz startled awake. He turned and there was a woman at his feet. "Who are you?" She said, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." She was asking him directly, not hinting, not waiting. After everything she has sacrificed, after all the quiet faithfulness, she was naming what she needed and asking him to respond. And Boaz, this is what reveals who he truly is. He was not offended. He was not calculating. He was moved. He said, "You could have gone after young men, rich or poor, but you did not. You chose covenant." Again, he had been watching her the same way she had been watching him. He already knew the answer to his own question before she arrived, but he told her the truth. There was a closer Kinsman-redeemer, a man with a prior legal claim. That man has to be asked first. He gave her his word. He gave her more grain. He made sure she left before dawn so her reputation would not suffer. And Ruth walked home in the dark with a cloak full of barley and something she had not carried in a very long time: hope. Boaz went to the city gates the next morning, and he did not waste time. The other Kinsman-redeemer passed by. Boaz called him over. He gathered the elders, laid out the facts. First, he mentioned the land. The man said, yes, he would redeem it. Then Boaz said, there is also Ruth, the Moabite, the widow. She comes with the land. And the man went silent. Because the land was an asset, but Ruth was a complication. If he married Ruth and she bore a son, that son would inherit the land in the name of the dead. His own estate would be diminished for the sake of someone else's name. He stepped back. He handed Boaz his sandal. And Boaz turned to the elders and said, "You are all my witnesses." It was not triumphant. It was not smug. It was a man who had just legally secured the right to protect two women he had already decided to protect. Boaz and Ruth married. The Lord gave Ruth conception. She bore a son. And the women of Bethlehem, the same women who had watched Naomi come back hollow, gathered around her and said, "Blessed be the Lord who has not left you without a redeemer today." Then they said the thing about Ruth that undoes you if you really hear it. Your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. 7 sons, the maximum imaginable blessing in that culture. 7 sons. And they said, Ruth, this foreign woman, this widow, this person who gave up everything for an empty-handed old woman on a dusty road, was worth more than all of that. Naomi took the child and held him. The woman who said she was empty, the woman who renamed herself bitter, the woman who walked into Bethlehem with grief instead of hope. She was holding what she thought she had lost forever. They named him Obed. Obed would be the father of Jesse, and Jesse would be the father of David. David, the king, the psalm writer, the man described as a man after God's own heart. His grandmother was a Moabite woman who refused to leave an empty-handed widow on a foreign road. His great-grandmother, by this lineage, was Rahab, another outsider, another woman who chose the God of Israel before Israel chose her. The bloodline of Israel's greatest king runs through women the world had already written off. There is something the book of Ruth seems to be arguing, quietly but consistently, underneath all of its beautiful narrative economy. Faithfulness is not always rational. Loyalty sometimes look like poor strategy. Kindness sometimes look like inefficiency. Staying when you could leave. gleaning when you could demand, asking humbly when you have already given everything. None of it follows the logic of self-preservation. And yet, the woman who walked away from everything she had ever known, who attached herself to grief and barrenness, and a bitter old woman with nothing left, she ended up in the genealogy of a king. More than that, she ended up in the genealogy recorded in the opening of the New Testament. Matthew chapter 1, verse 5, Ruth, the Moabite, named, remembered, placed in the line that led to Bethlehem again. Not the Bethlehem of famine this time, but the Bethlehem of a different birth, a different story, a different kind of redeemer. She did not know any of that on the road between Moab and Bethlehem. She just knew she would not leave, and sometimes that is enough. If this story stayed with you, then you are not just watching content, you are building perspective. Subscribe and join this community where we don't just tell stories, we uncover the ones that shape who you become.